Hi, I'm Nick Pollice. I'm the president of the Policy Management Consulting Group. And today I want to talk a little bit about leadership. When I first became a supervisor, I started to think to myself, how can I improve my ability to lead people? How can I improve my ability to lead through change? I found something out. I found that as leaders, we grow and develop in a certain way. You see, we don't grow and develop by doing certain things. We grow and develop by doing things a certain way. And many times I've been asked by people, how do I engage my people? I developed something called a Prism Model. That's P-R-I-S-M, Prism Model. And what this Prism Model does, it actually takes a supervisor, manager, or leader through 4 scales of leadership in terms of the things that they ought to consider doing. It starts with coaching, it then goes to counseling. Third phase is confronting skills, and the fourth phase, and hopefully we never get to it, is progressive discipline. You see, we coach individuals as soon as they come into our business unit. They're either hired in or they're transferred into our business unit. And you see, coaching is a directive process by a leader designed to train and orient an employee to the realities of the workplace and remove barriers to optimal work performance. And to that end, we actually have 8 elements that really make up that coaching scale. We have things such as orientation, training, job descriptions, sometimes they're referred to as position descriptions. We have objectives, we have ideas. Another element is regular meetings. Another element is support, and last but not least is performance feedback. We may use some or all of these elements in the coaching process. Let's start with the first one, orientation. A lot of leaders feel that it's the human resources job to orient the employee to the realities of the workplace. That may be true from a corporate standpoint, but it's definitely not true from a job or a business unit standpoint. It's our job as leaders of people to let an employee know what they're responsible for, how what we do in our job reflects on the bigger picture as to what the organization does, what our expectations are of people, what jobs they're going to do, how they're going to do it. It could be as simple as when's your start time, when's your finish time, when's your break time, when's your lunch time, when's your coffee break time. Orientation is a gamut of things that we as leaders cannot take for granted. It's our job to ensure that employees understand that. Also, training. What are we going to do in that second element of training? What are we going to do to develop the individual, to make them better 3 months from now as opposed to what they are now? What are we going to do to make them better a year from now? How are we going to grow and develop those skills in order to enable people to reach ultimate peak performance? What are the training programs? What are our expectations? How are we going to measure those expectations? All comes down to training and development. The third thing, not necessarily in this order, is something called a job description, sometimes referred to as a position description. What is the employee responsible for? How are we going to gauge the employee's performance? What are the terms of reference? What's the purpose of their job? What are their responsibilities? What are the critical success factors? How are we going to measure their performance? All is in a job description, position description, and that should be no more than 1 page. If it's more than 1 page, we're asking a lot more from our employees than what we should. The other thing is objectives. What are the objectives? What are the things that we expect them to do day in, day out, and do them safely and efficiently? What is the objective of their job? How are we going to measure that? The other piece is ideas. When employees have ideas, when they want to discuss challenges on the job, when they want to improve their job, what is the catalyst? What is the mechanism that's in place for them to bring those ideas forward? Who do they talk to? When should they talk to them? How will those things be explained in the overall scheme of things? What are your expectations of them? The other pieces on the scale is regular meetings. We all have meetings. Sometimes I think we have far too many meetings than what we need to have, but there are some meetings that are critical. It could be the health and safety meeting. It could be the environmental meeting. It could be the 5 or 10 minute meeting first thing in the morning. Sometimes people call them huddle board meetings. What are the mandatory meetings that we expect people to be at? And what are our expectations of people in those meetings? The other piece is support. What are we going to do to support people? How are we going to feed back to them in terms of what they do day in and day out? How will they know that what they're doing matters? How do they know with what they're doing is important to the overall success of the business unit? What are we going to do to support people in their endeavors on a regular basis? And last but not least is performance reviews, otherwise known as performance feedback. These are things that should be done at least once a quarter. And it doesn't have to take 2 or 3 hours. It's just a casual, sit down, 20 to 30 minute assessment on how you see what the employee's done in the past and how you are going to use those things that he or she has done to grow in the future. And also it works the other way. What are their expectations of you, and how do they see you as their leader? What have you done for them, and have you met their expectations? You see, all those elements are pieces of coaching, and you'll find that for every 100 people that you coach, 80 of them will stay in the coaching area. In other words, they'll never be a problem for you as an employee. You won't have any performance issues. The next element on the leadership scale is that of counseling. In the coaching model that I've just gone through, you've heard me say that for every 100 people that we coach, 80 will stay in the coaching element. In other words, they'll have challenges that are very small in nature. However, 20 of them unfortunately are going to slip into having some performance problems. Performance problems such as absenteeism, punctuality, failure to do the job on spec, on time, on budget. What we need to do as leaders is we need to support people in order to get them back up to the level of performance that we expect. You see, counseling is a supportive process by a leader designed to help an employee work through problems and challenges that affect daily performance. It's our job to revisit with the employee the objectives and the goals that we expect, and to find out what are some of the hurdles that they're encountering and help support them through the process over a given period of time. It may basically mean that we'll go back and do some performance management techniques with them. We'll go through and coach them back through the modules, but we need to be able to counsel them in a supportive and direct manner. It's important for us as leaders to understand that in the counseling process, the employee owns the problem. We're not going to take on the performance challenge for the employee. We are going to help the employee resolve that performance problem that they are currently having, but we're not taking ownership of that. It is incumbent upon the employee to resolve that issue. We can counsel them, we can coach them up, but they need to resolve that issue. So it's important for us to make sure that we listen, we understand, and we provide them focus in resolving their challenges on a daily basis. The third element on the leadership scale is that of confronting. For every 100 people that we coach, we're going to counsel 20. for every 20 people that we counsel, unfortunately, we're going to have to confront 5. And this is, I call this sometimes confronting the tough stuff. It's one of the most difficult challenges that we as leaders face. You see, confronting is an assertive approach by a leader designed to bring to the attention of the employee that performance is not measuring up to standard, and as a result, we need to be able to refocus that employee once again. An assertive approach is basically this: I am going to try to cooperate with you and get you to do the things that I need or want you to do, but by the same token, my expectation is that you measure up to standard. A lot of times what happens with employees is that their leaders don't always talk to them. Their leaders don't always let them know that they're falling down, and as a result, their performance slips through the cracks. And a lot of times leaders feel a little bit uncomfortable in talking to employees, but it's part of our job. It's what we're expected to do. And there are a number of things that we can do when confronting the tough stuff. We actually have 5 modes for confronting employees. All these modes have one thing in common. It's basically a degree of cooperativeness as well as a degree of assertiveness. And when we choose to be relatively uncooperative and we choose to be relatively unassertive, we choose to avoid the conflict. Very good strategy to use when the conflict is very small in nature, or the conflict that really doesn't concern us, or when the amount of energy that's going to be spent on resolving the conflict really doesn't justify the end result. However, avoiding a conflict is also a very poor strategy to use when the conflict can be serious in nature or it can grow to be serious in nature. We have to make a decision. Now, the opposite to avoiding is one of competing, where you choose to be highly assertive and relatively uncooperative. A great strategy to use when the values of the organization are being compromised, or when goals and objectives that have been previously agreed to are not being met. A very poor strategy to use when in fact the problems are very small in nature. It's almost like using a shotgun to kill a fly. The third mode of conflict resolution is that of accommodation, where we choose to be highly cooperative and relatively unassertive. This is a great strategy to use when the conflict is small in nature or when the conflict exists because of us. It's a very poor conflict resolution strategy to use when in fact the conflict is serious in nature. Now, if you look at accommodation and you look at competing, they both have one thing in common. You have to give up something to get something. That's where we choose to meet halfway. That's a compromise. And in a compromise position, we're not totally assertive, but we're not totally cooperative. We kind of meet halfway. It's a great strategy to use when we're dealing with some short-term challenges or when both parties wield an equal amount of power. They do buy us time to deal with the bigger picture, or they do buy us time to deal with a larger problem. Now, if both parties, the employee and the leader, are willing to explore both their needs, there is one very specific mode that will give us what we need, but it takes a very long period of time, or in some cases it takes a very long period of time to get, and that's one of collaboration. That's where both parties assert their needs and cooperate with each other in order to get what both parties need moving forward. In the overall scheme of things, when you look at those 5 modes, each one of us gives us value. It's knowing which mode to use and when to use it in an assertive way. Now, the last element on the leadership scale is one of progressive discipline. Now, you heard me say earlier that for every 100 people that you coach, you'll counsel 20. For every 20 people that you counsel, you'll confront 5. For every 5 people that you confront, you'll probably have to discipline 1. Unfortunately, progressive discipline is just a fact of our working nature. Before we talk about progressive discipline, I'd like to just highlight this. Every organization has their own process for discipline. So I'm not going to give you a process as much as I am going to talk about what progressive discipline is. From a leadership standpoint, progressive discipline is a formal process designed to get an employee to accept responsibility for their actions and agree to improve performance or face the consequences. Now, most organizations have a discipline process in place where there's a verbal warning, then there's a written warning, and then there's possibly suspensions. I'm not here to talk so much about that as much as I'm here to talk about the fact that you as a leader, unfortunately, in your job, sometimes will have to be involved in that process. And you can't leave it to your human resources department to spearhead that conversation. That conversation has to come from you. After all, the employee works for you, he or she takes direction from you, you're responsible for their performance, you're also responsible for carrying out this part of the leadership process, which I refer to as element number 4. Human resources can be there to support you. Human resources may also be there to tell you what to say and to coach you through it. But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility. And always remember this, whether we're at progressive discipline, whether we're at confronting, counseling, or coaching, we can always feed back and go back to element number 1, which is coaching. I'm always amazed by leaders that they like the coaching aspect of their job. They think they're good coaches. They think they can coach employees up to the next level, but they don't want to get involved in the more reactive part of the job, where the reactive part of the job is when there's a performance problem, we have to counsel. When the performance problem continues or the spirit of the performance problem continues, we have to confront. Or when the performance problem gets to a point where we don't have many alternatives, we need to progressively discipline. They like to leave that stuff for other people. Can't do that. That's why leaders have to have a tough skin. And you can't take your job personal. It isn't personal, it's all about professionalism. So the 4 scales of leadership: coaching, counseling, confronting, progressive discipline. And you can be at any of those scales or elements at any different time in the process. The question becomes one: do you want to be a leader, or would you rather be a follower? Because you can be both if the time is appropriate.